Hello, viewers. Hope all of you are doing fine in this COVID 19 situation. And today, I welcome you to the 10th episode of Classroom Presents the Tech Talk. And today, we are going to discuss about a very interesting topic. We know that the tech industry is growing very fast, and lots of new technologies, culture, and methodologies are coming up. And today we are going to discuss about mainly regarding SRE and DevOps cultures. And here today we have a very experienced guest with us. Will share his journey with us, how his experience in SRE and DevOps, and I hope that his experience in SRE and DevOps can help us to know that how we can also implement these new technologies into our organization or in our company. So let's welcome Paramvir. Hi Param, how are you doing?
Hi, Sumon. I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm also, I would say, like so far, I'm doing good and everything is good so far in my area or where I'm staying. But I can see that there's lots of going on throughout the world. So we hope that these things will get better in the upcoming days. Yeah. And how's like your days going during this situation?
I mean, it's very similar for everyone. I think I'm just staying home, working from home, which is like a huge change for me. I'm a person who likes to go out. So for me, it's a challenging time right now.
Okay, I also agree with you. Like that, like basically, as a software engineer, we are always a bit introverted, and most of like one of the best things about us is that we like to hang out with our colleagues, work together. Otherwise, we are mostly at home, and this time we are also having to work from home. So it's been long here in Berlin for, I would say, like it's been almost close to 3 months now
Yeah,
that I'm working from home alone. So yeah, it's a very tough time, I would say, but let's hope for like good things in the upcoming days. So yeah, you already like know that today we are going to discuss about a bit more about DevOps and SRE things. So can you just give us an introduction about yourself, what you are currently doing, and what your previous experiences
yeah, sure.
have been?
Sure. So my name is Param, and I work for Lendico right now as an engineering manager for IT operations. So
Yeah.
basically, when I work in IT operations, we are covering different areas, security, and bringing DevOps culture into the company and automating things and stuff like that. Also managing the overall cloud platform, all the services in cloud. But in my background is I started working for a company called Citrix. It's a American company, technology company, and I used to work on a product called Netscaler in Citrix. It was a networking based product, but it worked on all the seven OSI layers. So I worked with applications. It was a reverse proxy sitting in front of applications which receive huge amount of traffic.
Okay.
After working there for almost 3 years, I felt like I need to study ahead. uh,
Uh-huh.
and then I moved from India, from Bangalore to Stockholm in Sweden. I started studying in a university called KTH. Studied there for 1 year, and after that I moved to Berlin because my studies were kind of distributed between Stockholm and Berlin. Then I
Mhm.
studied in Berlin for 1 year. I studied about distributed systems, mostly talking about uh, huge amount of servers running and managing them. So that's what my studies were for. After which I moved into a company called Alpago, and I started. Now this company is not Alpago; it's being bought out by some big company, and
Uh-huh.
it was a really small company, team of 10 developers. And I started implementing DevOps culture in there. So I was again managing cloud platform. Used to work with AWS. After working there for almost a year, I moved to Seven Senders, where I met you, Shumon, and
Yeah.
that we know each other now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I worked there for about almost 2 years, little bit less than 2 years.
Mhm.
And again, I was implementing the DevOps culture there, automating things, making developers more efficient in producing code. And then, yeah, eventually now I'm at Lendico.
Okay, that's a like very interesting journey, and like as I can understand from your journey that you have been always been interested in distributed system and managing large scale application, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
that's something I enjoy, the challenge
Mhm.
of handling huge amount of traffic on your websites and or in general applications. That's something which really excites me.
Mm.
How to keep it running in a stable way.
Yeah, that's great because like if we compare about the technology industry, like around 10 or 5 years ago, it's been changing a lot, and at that time like there were not that much of like application that would get this high amount of traffic, and the
Exactly.
technology industry is changing. More and more people are coming up, everyone is getting like digital, and everyone is like now I would say like use websites the way we have not seen before. So it's
Yeah.
always a great challenge nowadays to handle this big amount of traffic.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, the whole tech company paradigm
Yeah,
is going really, really fast. It's growing really fast because technology is a competitive field. Like it's really competitive,
yeah.
and everyone wants some edge on someone. So it depends on your product. If
Mhm.
you talk about companies like Netflix, for them the change is really fast. So the systems
True.
they build are very, very adaptable to change. So for them, that's where the DevOps culture comes in. That's how you bring DevOps in to make yourself efficient, get DevOps into your company, and build this whole assembly line of software where you just pass on from one point to other to move to final product.
Yeah, and I think like this COVID situation is a great example for like driving technology first, because if we see Netflix and Zoom, and there are a couple of other solutions which they didn't have much amount of users before COVID situation, but after this COVID situation came, like they started to grow like crazy. They are getting lots of users, and it's a like very good amount of challenge. Like they maybe never thought like that we'll get this amount of users within this very little period of time. Maybe they would were thinking that they will to get this amount of traffic maybe 2 or 3 years. So
Yeah,
it's also
exactly. I
like
mean,
very challenging, right? Like
yeah,
you would
exactly.
never know. Yeah.
Exactly. All the streaming services, anything digital, and digital entertainment is crazy right now because everyone is home. There is no other way of entertaining yourself.
Yeah, true.
And
So
yeah,
everyone is into the internet browsing.
exactly, exactly. I mean, it's it's a bad place where the world is right now. But technology wise, I think this kind of pushes us to another level in technology because that's the only way we can solve challenges like this.
True.
So yeah, that's something which is really which really would really help technology or tech industry, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I also agree with you. And there's another thing like I want to know from your perspective, like that when you started learning about this or studying about these distributed systems and other things, and also how to handle this large amount of traffic. We know that there were not that much of resources also available, because it was a completely new thing. The tech industry was transitioning, so there were lots of things. We see that Google were trying couple of things, Netflix were coming up with their own technologies and things. So how did you find out into this arena? Because there's not that much of resources available. So how did you
Exactly. I mean,
find out resources and started to like develop yourself to handle these kind of things?
for me, when I was studying, I was doing my bachelor's. There used to be a lot of magazines. So
Mhm.
in those days, there was less of uh, digital content to learn from. So I started learning a little bit about virtualization. So how does virtualization work? I wanted to install VirtualBox on my system because I used to have a Windows PC in that times, and I
Mhm.
always super slow. So I wanted to test Ubuntu on my system, and I thought the easiest way to do it is use something like a VirtualBox, and that's how I got interested into this whole field of system engineering, I would say. And the time I finished my bachelor's, I really wanted to get into this industry of virtualization. So that was the start for
Mhm.
me. And luckily I got into Citrix,
Ah, okay.
where it was just about about technology. So the whole idea of Citrix was that every employee should work remote. So you should be allowed to work safely. So it also brings the paradigm of data protection, because if you make your employees work remotely, you can't really control their data. You also do VPN solutions and stuff like that. So that's where I started. And Netscaler, the product Citrix used to make, was something which was a reverse proxy. So you can use it for putting it in front of your application as a load balancer to hide your server, and you can do a lot of manipulation on this device. That's something I learned in Citrix, and I started to read about virtualization, how the whole technology works. Once I felt comfortable with that, and then I already knew that this is the thing I really enjoy, to have platforms or work with platforms which have high amount of traffic, and how to handle this traffic. So Netscaler was basically a load balancer. It was a reverse proxy, but a very advanced load balancer. You can manipulate the headers of the requests coming in before they go to the server. So that's the start for me. And that's how I started learning about this field. But everything changed in around 2014 or around 2013. It started to change because public cloud came in, companies like AWS came in.
Yeah.
And that's where I had a chance to know what are software-defined networks, because that's the whole public cloud is based on. It's a software-defined network, and that's how they work. I already knew about hypervisors, and because I used to work with hypervisors when I was in Citrix, and how the whole technology works. And then from there, the transition to the next level was to make it even more efficient, which came with public cloud. And when I was in Citrix, I also used to help some customers who were going to AWS but wanted to use Netscaler for certain things, because it was also a SSL solution. And that's where my journey towards, I would say, DevOps culture or SRE started, or in real sense. So I got a lot of knowledge about basic technologies like networking before going into anything else. So I already knew about networking, about what is OSI model, TCP/IP, how does the internals of our internet work. So that was the start for me. Once I knew that, then I already knew I want to move to the next level. I want to make this smarter. And the only way to make it smarter is build software. You can't make things smart when they are manual. You can do it once manually, but after that, it should always be automated. That's my opinion about this. So once I was into public cloud, then I learned how much automation you can do, and that's where I started. Then I started studying about distributed systems. Moved for my masters. That's the reason I moved for my masters. I wanted to make it smarter.
Okay. So you wanted to study more and see what academia people are researching on, and learn from there, and maybe after the study you can implement those things into your in the companies or in your work sector.
Exactly. I mean, when I was in Sweden, I started studying in Stockholm. So the whole year I studied about system architectures, queuing systems. How does a queue work? So if you have X amount of requests coming in, how are the queues getting emptied out? So I learned about queuing systems in my master's. But the last semester so it was 4 quarters in Stockholm. So you go through 3 months, and then that's how the format is there. And in the last quarter, I got to know about a course which was called Software-Defined Networks. So it was just about software-defined networks.
Okay.
And it was an amazing professor. And the theme of the course was that there were 20 research papers we had to read about and talk about them. So this was mostly research happening about software-defined networks. And all of those papers were from companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, who were building public cloud. So I learned how the whole public cloud is working, how smart it is, and how they are breaking the traditional technologies. For me, DNS was something like a fixed technology, but they customized DNS, and it was like DNS on steroids, and made it really smart. So they can do a lot of traffic manipulation. So there was traffic engineering and stuff like that I learned about, which helps me till today.
That's great.
Yeah,
So I'd say like the things you have learned in your like masters, it was has helped you a lot in
yes,
your journey, because otherwise it would have been tough to get to know about these things.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, can you like tell us more about like what is DevOps or SRE to you? Like if you want to start talking about these things to a newbie or a software
yeah,
engineer like me who
yeah.
doesn't have that much of idea about these things. So
Yes.
can you
I
just
mean,
share your?
for me, DevOps is a culture. It's a culture
Mhm.
you build in your company where you bring dev and ops together. In traditional model of software development, how people used to do, we always had system admins. So
Right.
developers were in older days. Like if you are old, you know that there were
Yeah. Yeah.
admins, and those system admins would always clash with developers. So a developer would develop in his own silo, and system administrator works in his own silo. Developer is a guy who's writing code, so for him the whole world is about very smart.
Developing things, writing codes. Yeah.
Yeah. Also developers are smart in the sense they automate stuff. For them, it's about writing code so that you don't do this again and again. But for
Right.
system admins, it was not the same. For
Yeah.
them, the concern was very different. How they worked was very different. Uh, and at the same time, public cloud came in, and then things started changing. The whole purpose of public cloud was to give this control to developers. And there was a bunch of research happening, and then there was a really good book I read about DevOps called the Phoenix Project, and that's the place where it all started. This defines what DevOps is. So
Mhm.
DevOps is basically a culture. It's not a role. It's not a team. It's everyone. So from software developers to system engineers or system admins, everyone should be part of DevOps culture. No one should work in their own silos, but you should know what's happening in other places. So Google has this really good book about the guide for
Yeah.
system reliability engineering. So DevOps is a culture, and system reliability engineering is a team that makes your system reliable. So what you basically want is that you want to create awareness in your software developers how to deploy applications. So they should not just develop applications, but
Yeah.
they should also run them. So you don't need a special person to run them. And this team which was created in Google called System Reliability Engineering, they had this concept that a developer should come to their team. So every team should send a developer for a finite amount of time, because the developers also don't want to do this. They don't want to be system admin. So,
Yeah.
but they should be shown the pain of system admin. They should be shown like how hard it is to run things in a reliable way, in a scalable way, and when you have bursts of traffic and issues like that. So the developers at Google started working in system admin teams, and once developers went in there, they saw how much could be automated already. So that's the whole idea, that you bring the developers in, you sanitize them, and you tell them how to run things, so that they know the pain of running things, and also they can make it smarter. That's why it's called dev and ops, because development and operations, they come together to work on something.
Ah, that's great, because like at first when I saw like this, like got to know about this term, and I saw there are lots of articles in the internet, and at the first I was thinking like that it's like a maybe system administration role, and they just gave a cool name in it, and most of the people I was talking with, it seemed like that system administrator, or if you can manage servers, you can call yourself a DevOps guy. And later like the book you are talking about, the Google book Site Reliability Engineering, and when I started reading it, at first chapter of it I found out that it's actually that nothing. It's kind of like you have to know, like you spend certain amount of time in automating things and certain amount of time in getting to know about the operations. So it's a balance between these two, and they have also like shared lots of insights there how they are doing it in
Exactly.
Google.
I mean,
So
the book also talks about how to build reliable systems. So
yep.
it also teaches you how you need to have this reliability mindset. So I would say DevOps is more of a mindset thing. It's more a
Yep.
mindset where you want to know about how other things are running. So it's both ways. System admins should know how software development works, and software developers should know how system administration works. So it's a collaborative thing.
Collaborative thing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And
exactly.
Yeah, like right now I want to like know more your experience on like you have started in large companies and also in a startup. So how did you find like to implement these DevOps things? And if you we talk about a growing company or a startup company, maybe at the beginning they don't know about these things, and also it's tough to implement like a culture into a startup because there are lots of phases in a startup. So can you share some of your experiences, that how you implemented, or what are were your challenges?
Yeah. So I mean, in the end, software development is a complicated thing. It's not an easy thing. I mean, it's easy to write software. You can learn software, but to build a product or to make sense out of it is a hard thing. So the first most important thing for anyone who wants to do DevOps is, or want to implement DevOps in their company, is they should know how actually DevOps works, or what DevOps is at least.
Yeah.
uh, and once you understand the concept of DevOps, I don't think so it's very hard to implement. It's more about how motivated your team is. So when a developer has been
Yeah.
traditionally working with a system admin, he faces a lot of pain, because if his application doesn't run on the production system, the system admin comes back to him and tells him there is a problem. It's not good. But once the developer starts solving this problem on his own, he starts automating stuff. And that's important. When you start implementing DevOps in your company, you need to explain this to your teams, how the whole culture works. So it's a cultural thing. So it's you don't bring a lot of technical changes. You don't need to build a lot of technical changes, but it's about explaining people about how things work. um, Finding the areas which you can automate in your build process. I mean, anyone who wants to implement DevOps in their company, I would suggest they should always go and read this book, The Phoenix Project. That's the book
Phoenix.
which really explains it well, because software development is treated like a manufacturing in this book, a manufacturing company. So it teaches you about how you can relate to those fundamentals of building a automated system. So you go from developing code to testing to production in a very efficient way. So it's about cleaning the system and making it more efficient.
Okay. So, what do you think? That the prerequisite, like what are the skill sets the software developers need to adapt to, like uh, getting themselves ready for this culture, and also what kind of mindsets the system administrator guys should have?
I mean, so when you talk about something like this, it's usually about change. I mean,
Mhm.
so you already have this mindset where you know that change is part of software development, and you really need to change things, move things. That's one thing. Skill set wise, it's an exploration, I would say. Once you get into it, you get to know about it.
Uh-huh.
When you're a software developer, you already know one spectrum, which is how to develop software. And then the second spectrum you need to learn about is how to deploy it safely. So I would say for me, I came from the other side. I came
Uh-huh.
from the networking background. So for me, I already knew about technologies. What I mean by technology is basic protocols. How TCP
Mhm.
works. What is TCP/IP? How does load balancing work? Just as an example. So I already
Yeah.
knew about basic technologies, how DNS works, how traffic. If some so the first question you should ask to yourself is, when you open google.com in your browser,
What
how are
happened?
you, what happens, where are
Yeah.
you? This is very common interview question also for a lot of people, especially if you're a newbie who's trying to get into this. That's
Yeah.
the thing someone might ask you, how this whole thing happens. And if you understand this flow, that's the start. That's where you know now, basically how the traffic is coming to your server. That's the first start.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. And another thing is how do you know, you have worked with startup companies and you have seen their transitions. So when can like a startup can know that yes, after this phase or in this phase, we can start implementing DevOps cultures, because as a startup there's lots of challenges. They have limited budgets, limited resources. So in that case, what could be their transition steps to enable or implement DevOps culture?
For a startup, I think DevOps is really important from the start, because when you're a startup, you don't have that many resources. You don't have the luxury to get 10 system administrators or 5 system administrators. You have software developers. Basically, if you enable them to deploy their applications, that's the start. You don't need to hire a system admin. You can have your developers working from end to end, building end to end pipelines in deploying their code. And for a startup, that's my opinion, that it's really important to start to adopt DevOps culture. And also for startups, it's really easy to do that. It's the bigger companies for whom it's going to be a challenge, because again, when you are building a startup, you are building something from the start. Also, the product is small. It's not
Yeah.
grown into a massive beast.
Yeah.
It's easy to handle at the start,
Right.
and you can break it and build it again. So I mean, if you take a perfect example of this would be Netflix. They have they
Okay. Yeah.
have a mindset of building change in their architecture. So it's really easy for them to change. That's how agile they are. When someone says agile software development, that's how you become agile, and you can move really fast. And if you adopt DevOps culture from the start, you move really fast. You can have fast cycles of CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous development. So whatever you commit, you can really go fast to production, because your whole pipeline is automated. So for a startup, it's already a huge benefit to go into this culture, or to adopt
Mhm.
this culture at the start. That's that's what I would say. And if a startup doesn't have this culture
Yeah.
and want to adopt it, it's relatively easier for them. Also, it's relatively easier for them to build this mindset of change, since the size is small, the scale is not that big. You are building things, and it's really easy to rebuild stuff from even from scratch in a startup. That's how I have seen things usually.
And also, what are the challenges or pain points you have find out during implementation of DevOps, or what can went go wrong?
So let's say when you start implementing DevOps,
Yeah.
the biggest problem I have seen with companies is either they are a lot towards system administration, so they
Mhm.
hire someone as a DevOps who has been a system admin and knows a little bit about how software development works and can write basic code.
Okay.
Then the problem is that he takes you in this direction, which is more towards system administration. I mean, he will not be exactly system admin, but he
Mhm.
will take the whole mindset direction into this field of system administration. And if
Mhm.
you take a software developer,
Yeah.
the problem with software developer is he will never think about security. As an example, so let's say you want to build something in public cloud. Best example would be AWS, since it's mostly used
Yeah.
public cloud. In AWS concepts, you have something called a VPC, which is a virtual private network, and you can
Yeah.
have your own private network. But if software engineer wants to launch his application, he would just use any VPC, and he will just start deploying things without building a networking base under it, without thinking how many free subnets there are, and what kind of subnetting should there be. There are a lot of reference architectures, but he might not take you into the direction where he will think about reliability, about how the system should be designed, or the bigger picture. So that's the problem of having someone who's purely software developer starting this,
Yeah.
and the purely IT administrator starting this. You need to have the right person for the job who understands what DevOps is, so that he can steer your team into this middle point where you are not a system admin, but
Mhm.
you also take care about reliability. You know how to make systems reliable, and you bring the smart software development concepts into this, where you automate the most of the part, because then you don't have mistakes when the things are automated. So the system is more reliable. There is
Mhm.
nothing manual. So that's the challenging thing in adopting DevOps, to have the right mindset, the right people.
Mhm. When you are talking about making things automated or automatic, like automate things? Like, are you talking about like automating the server or this whole process that you are like developing using these public cloud services? Like, we can spin up a server from the console or things, and in some cases when it goes big, it's never enough to do these things manually, and at that time you need to like do automate things. So you can also like tell more about this automate kind of things, that what kind of tools. We know that there are lots of tools available at the moment. So when do you feel like this, that yes, we need to automate these things? And there's also maybe a big part that developers can play, because they always are fond of writing code. So how in this part, in automating things, both of these parties can like play together maybe? And can you suggest some tools, or what was your experience in it?
So what my opinion is, first, it's important to identify what you want to automate. And to
Yeah.
know what you want to automate, I have this opinion that the first time you do something, it has to be done manually so that you know what's the flow, what's the process. Once you
Mhm.
know the flow and the process, it's really easy to automate stuff. There are some basic concepts. You just need to follow the best practices, and then you can achieve this. Example is, let's say, again, let's talk about AWS. If you want to
Yeah.
start up servers or build some infrastructure on AWS, you can start with implementing it manually. So if you want to, let's say, build an ECS cluster for containers. Let's say you run containers and you already know about containers. That's one scenario. But would you also want to know something like a monolith application and you want to
Yeah.
move it away or something like this, or just basic concepts? I can go into concepts then.
Uh-huh. Okay. And like I can see that when like we started at Seven Cinders, lots of things were manual, and before you like left, you started to like automate lots of things. And right now we see that there's new people joined, and we are trying to automate lots of other things. So why do you think like that automate can help you, or how much time it can save, or how much more organized or easily maintainable can it make if you do automation?
So, I mean, as an example, let's say you have your infrastructure, and your infrastructure consists of networking. It consists of servers which run on top of these networks. So they are
Yeah.
connected by networks. So there are these layers of things you add. Once you have servers above this, it's going to be load balancers and then services. And so once you have load balancer, and then you need to run Docker containers on these servers to give your application out. So there are these layers, and you need to identify which layers you want to automate and why you want to automate. Let's say a network or a VPC. You don't build a VPC every day. You build it once in 3 months, and then you just run your stuff on it. So you really don't need to automate this part of things. But
Okay.
then let's say you run something like a ECS for Docker orchestration. It's
Mhm.
orchestrated. You now this is something you need to think about to automate, because it could be that you will start 3 or 4 different ECS clusters. And if you want to start multiple ECS clusters, also if you want to have disaster recovery in case,
Yeah.
let's say, everything blows out and you need to build this again, then it makes sense to already start automating it.
Right.
There's this concept in general terms called infrastructure as code. So you
Ah,
can write your infrastructure as code, because this is the thing we get from software defined networks, that you can do API calls to software defined networks, and they can start spinning up things for you.
mhm.
Um, so basically, there are multiple tools. You can use something like a Terraform, or AWS has its own tool, CloudFormation, which is getting used at Seven Cinders also.
Yeah.
You can write your ECS container as, or ECS orchestrator as code. So whenever you want to spin up a ECS cluster, you can use this predefined template, and you can just start it. You don't need to do the same manual process again and again. So that's one thing. The important part of writing or automating things is
Yeah.
also thinking about change. If you don't think about change and your system becomes coupled, if you couple your network and your ECS cluster into, let's say, one automated solution, it could be that you are coupling these two things, and whenever you want to make a change in your ECS cluster, or like this automation change in ECS cluster,
Yeah.
you also need to make this same changes on the layer below. So it's important, when you automate, you need to think about what kind of things you want to automate, and how do you want to automate, what kind of layers you want to create for your system. So for some companies, it might make sense that they don't care about change, but for some companies, it might be that they really change fast. So for them, when they change so fast, it's important to automate all of this stuff, and also keep change in mind when you automate it, so that you don't screw around things when you are changing stuff. Tooling wise, you can use programming languages. You can write code in Python to make calls to AWS and start spinning up stuff, or start automating things. Or you can use tools like CloudFormation, which is the best practice, I would say. Terraform, CloudFormation, and stuff like this. So whatever tools you can use for those things, you can use that, or you can use a programming languages or a programming language to automate stuff.
And I guess like most of the cloud service providers have this SDK or API. So they support their SDK. So you can use that SDK or their API to develop the way you want. That's good thing. There's another thing is like that from your point of view or experience, I can understand that the system architecture design is also important, because how things are gonna change and how you are actually planning your whole system. This is like very much dependent on infrastructure, or infrastructure also dependent on this kind of system architecture. So what happens, like you say, like you also know this kind of pain points, that how this system becomes coupled to each other, and we see that the system is not like growing, but we don't see that it's the way it's developed, it's becoming much tougher to scale these things. And in that case, like how do you cope up with these challenges? And in this part, how like system designers and DevOps people can work together to like cope up these challenges?
Exactly. I mean, when you work in a software team, usually, let's say you are in a medium-sized company, there are 6 software development teams.
Yeah.
Each team has its own component or own part in the whole big product. So the problem there is that each one of them is working in a silo, and they are doing development on their own product. They don't have this overview of how things are running. And that's where the SRE guy comes in, or SRE team comes in. So either you can have these developers working in the SRE teams, or let's say you have a dedicated SRE team where you have fixed amount of people always working in this SRE team. They all have the view of all the components, because also they are making them run on these systems. So for them, it's easy to see which component connects to which component and how are they connecting it. And when this big overview of things comes into the SRE team, they play a big part in designing systems. So if you don't, also most of your systems are running on cloud providers, or let's say a big part of companies are now on public cloud, until or unless you're not in some financial system, or you don't care about certain things. Most of the big companies are moving to public cloud. Once you have these system designs, you also use a lot of predefined services from these cloud providers. Like in case of Seven Centers, you guys use SQS, SNS, a lot of services from AWS. In that case, when you're doing something like that, you really need a system architect who knows how all the systems are running, so that he can connect all the systems in the end. And then this SRE team comes in, which has overview of all the services, all the systems, and how you are connecting to these services. Then it's important for them to again think about layers. What kind of layers you want to use to connect these things and not couple them. So it's really important to not couple things, because if you couple them, it means one system breaking the entire system. One component breaks the whole system. Or you can start creating bottlenecks in systems. In software development, I think all of us know we love a single source of truth, have single sources of truth, but it's again a tricky thing to do. And let's say you have a service running which is just doing some sort of catalog of customers. Someone bought something from you, let's say travel, because it's like this COVID time going on right now, we already have a crisis. Let's say someone had a customer catalog for for flight bookings, and or let's any airlines, and then they have a single service as a single source of truth
Yeah.
running to have this catalog, and now they have to cancel out flights because everyone wants to cancel flights, and now the system is going to get congested, and it's the single source of truth, so the whole operation gets blocked. So that's the mindset a system reliability engineer needs to come with, where he can figure out these cases and he can design things in a better way because he already knows about how it's designed, how database, which databases is connected to, what is going to become a bottleneck. That's how you would decouple in the end.
Mhm. Yeah, like that's a very good insights, I would say, because most of the cases it happens that or I have seen in like startups, they start planning or designing the system architecture, and most of the cases there's a thing that they don't think about that the how the system will be implemented in a cloud environment, how one service will talk with each other. They just starts developing thing, and when they like starts implementing or deploying these things into a cloud or tries to like make it cloud compatible with other cloud services, and at that time the problem comes that yeah, when they started designing they didn't think about that how one service will communicate with each other, or how which actually cloud service will be helpful for us, or in which part what cloud service will like can be used, these kind of things. So yeah, I hope that the audience can have a great mindset from our discussion, because it's and from your like this discussion I can also understand that it's also necessary not only developers and DevOps guy become a part or work as a team. It's also necessary that the people who is maybe the software architect guys, system designers, they also need to work together. And you already said like DevOps is a culture where everyone needs to
Or
work together.
yeah.
So
And also
yeah,
it depends on your leadership. For example, I know of or also you know of Boris. We worked
yeah,
with Boris for quite some time. uh, his leadership was in a way, he was our CTO, and he had this mindset of automating things, or he knew like how to do this. He had this larger picture, he would let you
yeah.
do your thing, but he had this big overview of things. Also, in case of, let's say, development teams, you always try to build your own things. So if you're a developer, you will always try to solve everything through a new component, a new software, a new tool. But cloud provides you a lot of
Right.
services, so you can just use it. That's something like I picked it up from Boris, where he would always evaluate what you need to develop yourself and what is already there on cloud, and will it fit you, and if it fits you, how much coupled will you be with this. And that's something which is really important to understand, that if there is a service already there for it, you don't need to build anything. And that's also something system reliability engineering comes in. So if you have DevOps culture in your team, and then you have a system reliability team, they can always go to developers and talk with them about components they are building, and then they can already advise developers that you don't need to build something like this, because there is already a service we can use, which
Mm.
is built by the cloud provider. And this mostly fits in cases of startups, because the components or the services built by cloud providers are very much leaning towards how they can give more efficiency to startups. They can make them go faster. So a lot of products which come from cloud providers are very well designed for startups, which could be picked up directly. And that's the exact coupling you need to think about. How would you couple to it, and how would you maintain reliability?
That's a great point, I would say, because in most of the cases we see that we developers tend to develop everything by ourselves, and on the other hand, we see that lots of cloud providers are coming up with solutions that we can actually just plug and play and start integrating it in our system. And I've seen like in many companies like that's a like challenging point to convince the developers and all the stakeholders to use this service, because sometimes I've seen the developers think that why we need to like depend on a third party because there could be some changes needed. There could be like they don't want to depend on other people that much. And on the other hand, the product stakeholders, they want to develop something like in a hurry. So they don't think like you don't need to develop these things from scratch. You already have it. Just use these things. So what do you think? Like what could be possible pros and cons in these kind of situations, and uh, who can play like a good role to mitigate these conflicts in a team?
I mean, again, it's about how you design things. So everything comes to having the right mindset about developing things and being open to things.
Yeah.
It's a very tricky place to be in because I mean, everyone wants to develop really fast and have a product coming out first in the market and win the market with the new product and bring new features live very fast.
Yeah.
And developers have huge problems with that because it means they cannot do quality work, and they get tech debt. So if someone is pushing them to develop something really fast, they will have a lot of technical issues. They will release the product, but then in the end come up with a lot of tech debt which needs to be fixed over time.
Yeah.
To avoid this, the best thing for from my perspective is to use services from cloud providers as much as you can and develop just what you need to develop. So then you already can get this velocity, and this is something which needs to be explained to stakeholders about that. They should always try to find the best solution in terms of revenue they will earn and the money they want to spend on things, and then they can just buy services and use these services. For developers, the incentive is that they can really focus on developing good products rather than developing a lot of different components, because they don't need to. They can just build on quality, and they will collect less tech debt, which means it gives you far more velocity in moving ahead and building something nice. So it assists you. It assists you in if so that's also somewhere where SRE team comes in. So whenever you are going to build a solution, in my opinion, I always have this advice for development teams that always talk with the guys who are working with cloud first, because they can help you in designing it in an efficient way. Also, that you need to have people from product coming together and deciding on. So it's more about collaboration, getting everyone into one room, and then facilitating a discussion on how things need to be done, and what's the best way. How can we achieve speed and also not compromise on technology or quality of technology we deliver.
Yeah, I agree with you this point very much, that everyone needs to come in a room and discuss all the things together, because in some companies I have seen like that there's a system architect or software architect guy. He plans all the things and he designs all the things, and at that time no other people are involved, and then he just pushes or presents this thing to the developer thing and the developer team, and also to the DevOps guy, and they need to just follow that. And both of these parties who are actually very much dependent on these kind of things, they most of the times they don't have the chance to actually give their input or opinion into that.
The problem I see when you don't involve the SRE team into designing your system or in system architecture
Yeah.
is that this is the team which will run the stuff you build. So if you don't involve the guys who are going to run it eventually, there is going to be a conflict, because you will develop something in your own silo and then you will go to them and tell them you need to run this, and they already know that this is a bad practice.
Yeah.
For sure they will come back to you and say, this is a bad practice, you should have talked with us before you started working on this, and we could have advised you how you should have done this. So that's my point is, you cannot work in silos, and you cannot come up with plans on your own. Everyone of these teams have their own competences. So a SRE team cannot develop an application on their own. I mean, you cannot have that. Also, they will not have the level of knowledge of that particular component on which a developer works. They will have knowledge of the larger picture, overview of things, how things are running, but the innards of that particular component always stays with the developer. So they have very defined roles on how things need to be done by them, but it's in the end they need to come together to run things in a smoother and a nicer way.
Okay. And now, I know that regarding your journey, you had a very good background in networking, and you were always like interested in like how to handle a lot of traffic and how distributed system works. But if I compare it, like maybe software engineers, they were more into developing things rather than how the internet or web or the server things networking thing works. So what could be like possible guideline or steps for a software engineer if they want to know more about DevOps, SRE, and maybe in the long run they want to switch to this role?
I mean, from my perspective,
Yeah.
it's not that difficult for a software engineer to move to a SRE role. One
Mhm.
thing, skill set wise, you need to learn about different technologies. So
Okay.
in my case, when I was moving from the background of someone who worked with OSI model, I was
Yes.
working very deep into the OSI layer because I was fixing a lot of web-based issues. So I would take Wireshark traces and then go through those Wireshark traces to see what kind of communication is happening. And then I eventually realized that I need to learn software programming, or I need to start software programming of some applications, let's say web applications. And then I started building a little bit of application stuff, and I already knew how to run them. And when I was running these software applications, I it was easy for me. I could see things in a different way. I got a new perspective of things. I think it's the same thing for software developers. One thing is learning just the skills. That's knowing about what networking is, what DNS is, how they are working. Cloud is one thing, but technology remains same across. DNS is DNS for Azure, for Google Cloud, or AWS. We cannot call DNS anything else. So it's really important for you to learn technologies, and that's something which I see that in people lack these days because they are very dependent on cloud. They depend on cloud. They don't know about technologies, and that's the problem software developers will face more, because they don't need to learn DNS and how it works, so they can just go to the cloud and start working there. But that also means that they cannot follow the best practices. They don't know how the technology works, what is a recursive query in DNS, or so when
Yep.
things start breaking and start falling apart, they can't handle it because they don't have this experience and the knowledge. So one thing would be to learn the skill set. If you start working with cloud, like let's say you are a software developer, you developed something and now you want to launch it on cloud platform.
Yeah.
Just as a basic example, you start implementing it, you start looking into the documentation from the cloud providers and you start running it, and then you already know you are using route 53. Route 53 is nothing but DNS.
Yep.
Start learning about what is DNS. If you are using VPC, you already know it's networking, so start learning about what networking is. Once you start learning networking, the first thing you get to know is IP addresses. You get to know what is an IP and how your machine has an IP and what are private subnets and things like that. So it's important to know about those basic technologies because that's where the reliability part comes from. That's how you can make your system reliable. Uh, you know about data centers, and then you know there are different zones, and there is networking happening in between them. So that's the part you need to develop. That's the skill set you need to gain, skill
Mhm.
wise. Apart from that, it's more on the mindset. It's more about how open you are about learning things. Because if a system admin goes into software development and starts seeing how things are done in software development, he comes up with his own biases. Because he's a system admin, he already has this bias, and that's important for you to lose, become neutral, and accept the learning part. And then that's the journey you need to take for going from software development to DevOps or SRE.
Mhm. Okay. That's very like good to know, because from also like I was studying couple of like maybe taking some courses in GCP and AWS. So yeah, from your point, I get it that yeah, as a developer, when I was using different cloud services provider, it's not like that I needed to like get into deep of those portions because they are managing all the things from me. I just need to know like which services I need to know to manage which parts. But as you said, like if I want to know that how inside deeply these things are connected works, and if anything breaks up, how can fix this, and without knowing the deep part of these things, I can't even actually design my system properly. So yeah, I agree with that. And networking is a very good part, maybe to start with.
Yeah, I can give you an example of a
Yeah,
issue we faced at Seven
yeah, yeah,
Senders.
that would be great.
Yeah, we were running one service, and then suddenly I was on a holiday, and or I was on vacations, and I get a call saying our all our systems are down, nothing is working. What I did was I just did a normal DNS query to see what's happening with the DNS. And I realized that the IP of the load balancer or the load balancer for the application does not match, or the name resolution is not happening in the right way. Now, if you don't know how DNS works, you don't know how to troubleshoot DNS. So in Route 53, the entries were right. So everything was
Mhm.
good. There was nothing wrong on AWS. In the end, the problem was that GoDaddy had a DNS entry for us. And I guess you
Yeah,
remember.
I remember the thing during the uh,
Yeah,
Black Friday.
exactly. And it was a
Yeah.
crunch time. And then
Yeah.
someone in GoDaddy changed our name servers. And the name server were pointing to AWS. Instead of pointing to the name servers of AWS, they started pointing to the name servers of WordPress. And then the whole resolution started failing. And then everything was cached everywhere. So if you don't know about the fundamentals of technologies, you will not figure out what the problem is. And that's so you can run things, but you cannot have reliability then. So that's the part where software developer need to focus on building reliability into the system. So knowing the system.
Yeah, that was a like very interesting like pointer. We remember that because that was a mess up, complete mess up. And at the time, like we only had to do nothing to do actually. We did our part, and then we had to wait when this DNS thing will be like cached will be clear. And we
Yeah.
also maybe like suggested some of our clients to clear their like local cache or DNS
Yeah.
cache.
If
Mhm.
you have some experience or know technologies like DNS,
Yeah,
you our internet is not advanced. Our internet is a primitive thing. It's a really old system. It was we were not born when internet
yeah,
was started. So if you imagine the whole technology stack of internet is ancient. So if you deal with something which is ancient, you don't even know from where something might come out or something might be bad. So but the important thing to know is that you know that the internet is ancient. If you don't know that, then you will always fall. So that's the kind of mindset which needs to be taken by a software developer and moved into SRE. So you need to learn basic approach. There's a lot of people who call themselves system reliability engineers and DevOps, but that's not the fact. I mean, let's be honest about that it's a really a skill set you need to develop and work on. It's not an easy thing to think on reliability. It's a
Mhm.
complicated.
And yeah, I agree. Like from your part or this experience, I can also understand that you will also need to know about like not only your system, how this system is developed, also how the whole internet works, what kind of components are there, and which part can have what kind of impact in our system or throughout the whole journey of delivering a like web page. So yeah, and there's lots of things to learn and lots of new things, challenges are coming up. You have to always keep developing yourself, studying new things.
Also,
So yeah,
you need to start learning about how different applications are built. So if you, let's say you want to build a financial application, you
yeah,
would not use PHP
yeah,
because the number of transactions are going to go high. So you need to already know certain system level things. You will always use something like Java, which
right,
is most of the financial companies work with Java if they
yeah,
have high transaction rates. If you are developing a web application and you don't want to spend that much time, I mean, in the end, you don't want to spend resources like Java,
yeah.
you can start with PHP. So you can build a web application with PHP, which is perfectly suited for web application development. So those are the kind of things. As a software developer, you can stick with your domain. You can just
Mhm.
stay with one programming language. But if you go for a role which is a SRE role,
Yeah,
you need to have a broader knowledge. You need to know, like, you don't need to know about all of the deep secrets of those languages, but
yeah.
you need to know how they are running. So that's part of your job.
And also maybe like pros and cons of each technology, so that whenever it's needed, you can choose the best solutions for your problem.
Exactly. I mean, what you can implement in which scenario, that's important. What is the in the end, we are solving problems, and you need to have the right tools to solve a problem, and the tool which solves a problem. That's the bottom line of the whole topic. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also another thing is like depending on the sector or the industry of the software you are developing for, there's lots of other things. Like in financial sector, there's lots of like rules regarding compliance, and maybe in some countries there's also rules like that you cannot host your data from this country to server in another country, and
Exactly.
lots of other things, data protection rules, privacy rules. So as a maybe DevOps guy or SRE guy, you also need to take care of those things, so that those things are also maintained properly.
Exactly. I mean, in my experience, I have worked
Yeah.
for two financial companies now. One was a company which was storing credit card data, so the
Mhm.
compliance was really crazy,
Yeah.
and that's also something I learned in Lendico, like the company I work now. Again, a financial company,
Yeah.
a lot of compliance, and it can really. Um, if you are a traditional bank, the way
Yeah.
they do compliance, or like in general manage compliance, is very different from a company which is a startup, let's say like Alpago.
Okay.
you you start implementing a lot of DevOps culture in even in compliance. So you start automating checks, you start automating scans, you start automating
Mhm.
reports, because for compliance you always need to generate reports. And as
Mhm.
developers or technical people, for us it's super hard to work on something like a Excel report or some other kind of report. We don't do that. We hate that, and it's better to just automate that stuff, move it out of your normal work thing. And that's the difference I see between, let's say, a big bank, because Lendico is owned by a huge Dutch bank called ING.
Yeah.
And for them the approach is different, because they have the number of resources they have is also big. Big bank, a lot of money, they can hire people for specific stuff. But Lendico, being a company which was a startup and now is bought by ING, they have resources, but the mindset is more on the direction of, let's automate,
Let's start. Mhm.
let's not make this a manual job which you need to do again and again. So that's where the smartness of a software development comes in. But also, you need to understand the concepts like security and how to make things secure, so that you get compliance right. You know
And
how.
also there, I know that couple of things involved, like you have to do regular audit of your data, and there should be like enough data backup policies also, because you have to like record all the things, because whenever compliance comes up or for auditing, they may need data from 2 or 3 years ago, or a whole picture or whole transactions of a customer data.
You need data retention policy, you need data removal. So you can't store data from someone for more than, let's say, 2 years if they don't have consent on it. Just as an example, I mean, it's not the perfect figure I'm saying, it's just uh,
Mhm.
example I'm giving. Yeah.
Ah, okay. That's great to know, like this kind of insights from you. So maybe now we can take some questions from our audience that we got at Slido. So I can share the questions here, and maybe we can take some. Though already maybe we have discussed
Yeah.
a couple of questions already. So if I check here, there's already maybe the first question we can see is that how a startup can implement DevOps culture. We have already discussed about this kind of things,
Yeah.
that maybe we can skip this one, or maybe you can add some points like when a startup
I can
is. Yeah.
summarize it.
Yeah.
At core of it, it's about the leader you have, the leadership you have, because they need to create a culture, and DevOps is a mindset, so that you bring everyone in together on development and deployment. So that's together. It's mindset. So basically, you need to have the right leadership who can always make the developers, or give the developers power to run their code. And that's how you would start with DevOps.
And from your point, like I can also understand that the management guy who are like in charge of the startup, they also need to be like in the same mindset and allow these kind of things to be to happen in the organization.
Exactly. You need to identify the benefits of DevOps as
Mhm.
management and then prioritize it.
Yeah. And if we check the next question, it's like, can you please tell us which skills are prerequisites to start working as a DevOps? And maybe like you can say more about what's the difference between DevOps or SRE, or how to differ between these two roles.
DevOps is not a role in my opinion. DevOps is
Uh-huh.
more of a practice, and
Mhm.
SRE is a role which is about reliability engineering, which is about making your whole system reliable. Prerequisite wise, I would say you should either you should start in my opinion you should always start learning how to program. That's the first
Mhm.
thing. To start programming, start once you start programming, then you already know in which direction you want to go. So yeah, start programming, program more, automate things,
Mhm.
build the mindset.
Okay. So from that part, I can go that there's a interesting question that when you said like that you need to program more or automate things. So sometimes we say that people gets demotivated and like they don't want to maybe learn programming. So as a beginner, how one person can like keep himself motivated in learning coding or keep doing it?
I mean, so in the end, you get demotivated when something doesn't work. So
Mhm.
that's in software development. This is what I've seen. People don't do software development because when they start it, it's hard to get the concepts. So
Yeah.
once because you don't, the things are not working out, and then you just leave it. And then there are people who have patience to go through it. And once you cross a certain barrier, you already can learn programming. You can be a good programmer. But if you would like, I also have this opinion where a lot of people think that software development is hard and system engineering or system administration is easier. But that's not the case right now, because now everything is there is cloud, and you have to work directly with developers. They see you, you see them, and that's how the things are now. So you can't get away uh, without knowing how coding works. So you don't need to be someone who codes like a lot, but you need to understand the fundamental concepts and then apply them into system engineering also.
Mhm.
And
And all, yeah.
that's what I feel. If you want to keep yourself motivated, try to pass the barrier, be patient, don't lose focus, because in the end, all of us went through this where we felt this is not working and this is hard. I cannot do this. So yeah.
Yeah, and also like I can share my experience that when I started learning PHP back in like 2009 and 10, for 2 or 3 years I was like only working with raw PHP. There were no like OP principles, there were no MVC things, because first of all I didn't know about those things. And when I started to learn about those things, in the first glance I was not understanding anything, and things were like very hard for me.
Yeah.
So I just pushed that thing in a part, and I was continuing like this. And then when I started doing my first job, and they said that you have to follow the MVC practices and work in a like a coordinator framework. It's a popular PHP framework at that time. And at first like it's maybe a human mindset that whenever we try to learn something new, we fear that thing. So
Yeah.
I was not sure that whether I will be able to do it or not. But after spending 1 week time on that, it seemed like very easy for me, and I was like very happy to know about these things, because before that the pain points that I was facing while working with just pure PHP, and after following this architecture I found out that my like course become much more reusable, it's well organized and other things that I after that I always used like MVC and OP practices. And there's another time I started learning about design principles and OP. At first I was maybe understanding the basic concepts of objects and classes, but I didn't know that how I can implement these things when I want to, like I'm writing an application, or how actually should I think. Then after working for 2 or 3 years, I got to understand and it came from the experience. And now I can say that after 4 or 5 years of journey, whenever I see a new technology at the moment, I don't face any problem, or I don't have the fear that I used to have like 2 or 3 years ago. Right
Yeah.
now my mindset is that yes, I can learn these things. Maybe it will take 1 month or 1 week or 2 weeks, but I can do it. So it's also another thing, the mindset will change if you keep giving time, and a certain amount of after a certain amount of experience, the journey will become much smoother.
I mean, in same thing in my experience, I also feel like if you
Yeah.
are working in a field which is technology, you need to be open to learning because things change very fast. In 2012, when I started working, I was working with hypervisors. So it was
Mhm.
always about VMware and having servers running on ESXi, or Citrix had its own hypervisor called Zen Server. Now no one works with, like, no company has its own data center. Let's say a startup. I don't know
Mhm.
any like startups who have their own data centers until or unless they have to do some compliance and they need to have their own data center. No one has it. So no one works with hypervisors anymore. But the thing is, people who were working on hypervisors now moved in with something else. Like me, I used to work with technologies like that, and I had to learn, adapt. So it's very important in technology to keep learning, to keep evolving. Otherwise, you will be stagnant because, yeah, as a field, it is about learning. It's completely learning all the time.
And we say like change is the constant
Right.
here. It will always keep changing, and you have to adapt to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so next we have a question from one of our ex-colleague, I would say, Chema. So he asked that which programming language or languages do you recommend to know or learn in order to work as DevOps, and any best practice guide about how to start in this field?
So for Chema, since I already know him, it's
Yeah.
easier for me to say. The thing is, programming language wise, you can use any programming language to automate stuff. It's your personal decision. It's your
Mhm.
personal choice. Industry wise, most people use Python as a standard for most DevOps teams, or Go is also very common. If you want to develop some applications, you should for sure use Go for DevOps or SRE teams. Most SRE teams run with Go applications if they build something of their own. For automating, you can always use Python. You can also use Bash at certain things. So it's a combination. For me personally, I always use Bash and Python in combination with each other. When I was completely hands-on, that's what I did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like from your perspective, or like your point of views, if I summarize that, I'm into software engineering. So first of all, maybe I need to learn how the internet works, or IP, DNS, all the components that is that makes the internet, and also networking, how networking works. And then maybe I can start learning about containerization, virtualization, how Docker works. And nowadays we see like that there are a couple of tools for container orchestration like Kubernetes. And then maybe we move into a cloud provider, that how they are providing these tools to make so that we don't have to manage the underlying infrastructure ourselves and
If
make
you
use of those services.
if you see the core of Docker containers is like,
Yep.
it's not super hard to learn if you know Linux, if you
Mhm.
know networking. It's very easy because the container orchestration is nothing. There is a manager which is just putting containers on different servers, and it manages the capacity of your nodes. It has a control plane which has image of the whole distributed system you have under it. So this
Mhm.
control plane is controlling all those servers, and that's simple. And then on top of it, if so basically, if you don't know how Docker runs, you cannot know how Docker orchestration works.
Right. Yeah.
Similarly, if you don't know how normal Linux system is working, you don't know how Docker container is running. So it's a layer, and then you can't skip layers and go to something else. So you always have to go through layers. You start with best example is you go to OSI model, or OSI model, or TCP/IP model, and you start looking at those layers. What does network layer does? What does physical does? What is application layer? And then on each layer, you should know how the layers are functioning, and that's how you learn stuff.
Mhm. Okay, and right now, like I would like to know, like from your experience, that before joining Lendico, you were a lead DevOps engineer at Seven Centers, and now you are mainly working as an engineering manager. So, what's the difference, like you have found in this role, and what new things you needed to learn? Because I see that the question right now we have it also a bit related to management, that he's asking that he's a like CSE graduate, and if he wants to work in a like manager level job, like does he need a MBA degree, or what could be helpful in this path for him?
I mean, if you want to go into the direction of management, definitely you don't need an MBA if you want to manage tech teams. So if
Mhm.
you're only working with technology teams, you don't need to have an MBA. If you have one, it's also good. But in general, from my perspective, then you should already build some experience of software engineering, and then it makes sense to go for an MBA, because then you know how software development works, and then you can decide for yourself which direction you want to go to, and take a MBA. But if you say you don't have software development experience, you are a CS graduate and you want to do an MBA, and then you just want to straight away work, I think it's not the best thing to do. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Mhm. So he should have some, I
Work
would say,
experience.
work experience in software or technical part. Then maybe he moved to a like manager part. And can
Yeah.
you say like what's the difference you are seeing, that or things you have to manage which maybe are not that much technical, because you have to maybe manage people, and
Yeah.
it's a bit different from developers perspective, because we always try to like hide away from humans.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was working at Citrix at the start, I used to work in a very big team. It was about 50 engineers who were working in four different teams, but all of us were doing something similar. Each
Mhm.
had its own tech lead, and then there was a manager on top of it. So in my experience, I had a good base of how organization works, how to build an organization structure, and how to build teams. And when I started working in Seven Centers,
Yeah.
I was the one who hired people. So I was also taking part in other things, in not just technical stuff. So I was taking care of both technical and non-technical stuff in Seven Centers. And now when I'm in Lendico, it's more about management. So it's less doing hands-on work. It's more about giving technical direction,
Mhm.
how also training the junior engineers on how to view the whole bigger picture.
Scenario or bigger picture. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, exactly, to see the bigger picture. So it's more about people management, taking people from one level to another. So basically explaining them how to reach another level and what they require to reach another level in their career, and helping them manage their career. So now it's on other direction.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's great to know. I hope that we are like almost at the end of this today's session. And thanks, Param, like for your time and giving us your valuable experience. Share it with our audience. Hope like that the things we have discussed about today, it will be beneficiary for our audience in the long run. And yeah, that's it from today's session. And before like we signing off today, do you have like anything maybe summarize something or share anything to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, from my opinion, if you want to go into system reliability engineering, it's a really cool field to be in. A lot of people don't know about it,
Mhm.
and there is a lack of smart, trained individuals working in this field. There is a lot of developers, but there are less reliability engineers in comparison to the number of developers we have, and we need more of the good engineers. That's the summary from my side. So in case you want to get into this field and you have any doubts and questions, or you can approach me. I'm happy in helping someone who wants to get into this. Second thing is a thank you for you, Shumon, for organizing this. It was a nice experience for me. It was really nice being on your podcast.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks again for you to make time for me. And also do you want to share any of your how people, if people wants to get connected to you, what could be a good maybe social media handle or anything that people can reach out to you?
Sure. I mean, I can share my LinkedIn address with you, and that's the best place to reach out to me. If you have any questions, just send me a message, a personal message on LinkedIn, and I will reply back.
And I think if you can you search Paramvir Singh in LinkedIn, you can find him, and also his profile is tagged in our LinkedIn page. So that would be a good way to start connect with start connecting with Paramvir. So yeah, that makes us to end today's episode. And before I end today's episode, I want to let the audience know that tomorrow we have a session on front-end technologies in 2020. So we know that in last maybe 5 or 6 years, the front-end technology has evolved a lot. There's lots of JavaScript, and I would say everywhere it's JavaScript. So we'll talk about this cool new technologies in tomorrow's session. So the audience, maybe if you are interested in learning front-end, you can join us in tomorrow's session, and it will be from 10 p.m. at night in Bangladesh time. So thanks everyone who has been there for us in all of our sessions, and maybe we'll be keep doing lots of this kind of sessions. And yeah, thanks everyone, and bye for today. Have a great day, night, or afternoon wherever you are in the world. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.